The unpaid debt notice was taped to the staff entrance at 4:47 a.m., before the Sun could witness it, before the editors had their first coffee. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was addressed to the building itself, to the newsroom that had housed truth for 80 years, now suddenly a tenant in its own home. Quinn Marbury found it while hauling a pallet of newsprint through the basement distribution bay, his boots crunching on concrete that hadn't been sealed since the 1970s. He didn't touch the notice. He read it 3 times, methodically, the way he counted everything: boxes, hours, debts. Then he looked up at the pipes threading through the ceiling and knew someone had already chosen who would take the fall before the truth could find its feet. Upstairs, Leighton Fairchild was sorting legal mail at the reception desk, her fingers cold from the overzealous air conditioning that kept the executive suites comfortable. She didn't know that a courier slip in her bin showed court filings delivered to the wrong tenant, didn't know that mistake would soon be weaponized against her. She smiled at Quinn when he passed through with his cart, a brief, warm thing in a building that was growing colder by the hour. He nodded back, precise, controlled, his eyes holding something she couldn't name. Neither of them knew that by noon, one would be publicly humiliated in a boardroom to protect a real estate scheme, and the other would face a choice that could destroy them both. The debt was opening. Everything was about to collapse. This is a story about what we owe, what we hide, and what we sacrifice when the powerful decide that silence is more profitable than truth. Watch until the end. The final revelation changes every glance, every silence, every choice that came before it. The pre-dawn print deadline had always been sacred, a rhythm older than most of the staff, older than the digital screens that now flickered beside the old presses. Quinn moved through the basement with the certainty of someone who had learned to be invisible in spaces that mattered, his cartwheels squeaking against the concrete in a pattern he could control. He was counting again 4 to 7 minutes until the first trucks, 12 pallets remaining, 3 security cameras between him and the staff entrance where that notice waited like a wound. The paper was thin, cheap, the kind used for final warnings, and it declared the building's mortgage in default despite no missed payments anyone could name. He photographed it with his phone, not his work device, a distinction that mattered to him in ways he never explained. The distribution basement had no windows, only the red glow of exit signs and the distant vibration of the presses above, a heartbeat that was faltering now, uncertain. Quinn had taken this job 18 months ago, leaving behind a name and a fortune that would have made this notice impossible, choosing instead the concrete and the counting and the debt trail that led here. He didn't tell anyone why. He didn't tell anyone anything he didn't have to. The notice mentioned a court date. The notice mentioned a new creditor. The notice was signed with a flourish that seemed to enjoy its own power, and Quinn recognized the legal stationery before he recognized the name beneath it. He folded the paper carefully, placed it in his pocket, and returned to his pallets with the same methodical pace, the same quiet hands. Someone wanted the newsroom to panic before breakfast. Someone wanted workers to arrive to fear, to spread it through the break rooms and the Slack channels before management could shape the narrative. Quinn understood the strategy because he had once helped design such strategies, in another life, for other buildings, other debts. He didn't stop working. He didn't call anyone. He simply noted that the filing number on the notice matched a sequence he had been tracking for 3 years, a chain of title that moved through shell companies like blood through veins, invisible until it wasn't. The first truck arrived at 5:34 a.m. Quinn loaded it alone, his shoulders bearing weight that would have broken a less careful man, his mind bearing weight that would have broken a less angry one. He thought of Leighton upstairs, warming her hands around a coffee cup that cost half an hour of her wage, and he wondered if she had seen the same notice on the executive floor, or if they were saving that version for later, for when they needed a specific scapegoat. The debt was opening. The building was breathing its last honest breath. And Quinn Marbury, poor warehouse worker, methodical counter of boxes and hours, was the only one who knew this was not a mistake but a design. What would he do with that knowledge before the sun rose high enough to expose everything? Leighton found the courier slip at 6:15 a.m., wedged between a subscription renewal and a legal standards memo that no one would read. It was addressed to tenant, 4th floor, newsroom division, a vagueness that immediately struck her as wrong because the newsroom owned the building, didn't they, hadn't they for decades, the mortgage paid off in 1987 according to the framed certificate in the publisher's office. She was 26, supporting a younger brother through his first year of community college, her salary just enough to keep them in a studio apartment with good locks and bad plumbing. The reception desk for legal and standards was a glass cage at the corridor's end, visible to everyone who passed, invisible to anyone who mattered. She opened the slip with fingers that had learned to be quick, efficient, unremarkable skills born from years of being judged for taking too long, asking too many questions, needing too much. The slip showed a court filing delivered yesterday at 3:47 p.m., signed for by someone named M. Turner, a name that didn't exist in the staff directory she maintained with religious precision. The filing was a notice of foreclosure proceeding, initiated by a creditor Leighton had never heard of, attached to a debt that the building's owner, the newsroom itself, the employee-owned trust, supposedly owed. She checked the date. She checked it again. The debt was dated 3 weeks ago, but the trust's financial statements she processed last Friday showed zero liabilities, clean books, a stability that had been celebrated at the all-hands meeting. Leighton knew about forged documents. Her father had lost their childhood home to a paperwork trap, signatures moved, dates changed, notaries paid to look away. She knew the smell of design disaster, and this slip smelled like it, like expensive paper and cheap intentions. She should have taken it to her supervisor. She should have followed protocol, the chain of command that existed to protect the institution and, theoretically, her. But her supervisor was in meetings all morning, and the meeting calendar showed Vera Ashdown revitalization strategy in the executive conference room, a name that had been appearing with increasing frequency, a name attached to smiles in the lobby and cuts in the basement. Leighton made a copy. She hid the original in her personal files, the locked drawer where she kept her brother's financial aid letters and her own resume, updated monthly, always ready. She thought of Quinn passing through earlier, his eyes on the floor, his hands steady on his cart, and she wondered if he had seen something too, if the basement had its own notices, its own warnings. The rich had ways of knowing things early. The poor only had vigilance, and even that was punished as paranoia. By 7:00 a.m., the newsroom was filling with editors who hadn't seen the notice, who moved through their morning with the confidence of people who believed their building was secure. Leighton watched them from her glass cage, the courier slip burning in her locked drawer, and she understood that she was now carrying something dangerous, something that would either save her or mark her. Who had signed for a court filing that didn't exist, and why was the name M. Turner already fading from her memory like a dream upon waking? Vera Ashdown's takeover memo arrived in inboxes at 8:00 a.m., perfectly timed for maximum impact before the editorial meeting, formatted in the calm blue of corporate reassurance. Dear colleagues, it began, a lie in the first word, because Vera had never been anyone's colleague, only their creditor in waiting. She was 53, dressed that morning in cream silk that cost more than Leighton's monthly rent, her posture perfected through years of boardrooms where power was measured in who spoke last. The memo promised stability, partnership, a revitalization that would honor the newsroom's legacy while securing its Futuria future, Leighton noticed, that involved streamlined operational structures and right-sizing of support functions. She read it 3 times, the way she read everything now, searching for the blade hidden in the blessing. The cuts came in paragraph 4, almost as an afterthought to ensure our shared success. We will be transitioning our hourly distribution and facilities staff to a contracted service model, effective immediately, with generous severance packages for those affected. Generous. Leighton thought of Quinn in the basement, counting boxes, his shoulders bearing weight that wasn't in his job description, his silence bearing weight that was. She thought of the other warehouse workers she passed in the corridors, the ones who couldn't afford to wait for generous while rent was due next week. Vera was in the building that morning, moving through the executive floor with the ease of someone who had already measured the space for her own furniture. Leighton saw her from the reception desk, saw her pause at the legal standards corridor, saw her smile at the managing editor with teeth that had never worried about dental coverage. The memo's language was masterful. Leighton had to admit every harm framed as help, every loss described as opportunity, the hourly staff free to pursue more flexible arrangements while the salaried employees were protected through strategic alignment. But the protection was conditional, Leighton realized, reading deeper. The protection required cooperation with transitional documentation, which meant signing things, which meant trusting that the paperwork matched the promise. She had seen this before, in her father's story, in the stories of everyone who had ever been poor and therefore required to prove their honesty repeatedly, while the wealthy simply assumed it. Vera's smile found her through the glass, a moment of eye contact that felt like assessment, like selection, like the choosing of a scapegoat before the crime was even named. Leighton looked down at her keyboard, her fingers suddenly cold, and she understood that the memo was not the weapon, it was the invitation to participate in her own disarmament. The hourly staff were being cut first because they were the proof of the building's vulnerability, the demonstration that no protection was permanent, that even the newsroom that reported on others' evictions could not prevent its own. Quinn would be among them, she realized, unless he had already seen this coming, unless his methodical counting had included the days until his own dismissal. What did he know that she didn't, and why did his silence feel less like ignorance and more like preparation? Quinn spotted the ledger code at 10:23 a.m., during the chaos of the transition announcement, when no one was watching the basement because everyone was watching their own fear. He was processing the severance paperwork for his colleagues, not himself. His name wasn't on the list, a fact that should have relieved him but instead made him methodical, careful, aware that omissions could be as significant as inclusions. The code was in the margin of a facility's invoice, a string of numbers that matched the eviction docket numbers he had been tracking for 3 years, the same sequence that appeared on the notice taped to the staff entrance. He copied it onto his palm with a pencil stub, the way he had learned to record things that couldn't be photographed, couldn't be traced, couldn't be explained if found. The invoice was for consulting services rendered by a company with no address, no website, only a P.O. box in a state known for corporate secrecy. The amount was small, unremarkable, designed to be approved without question by an accountant who had too many other worries that morning. But the code connected it to the debt, to the foreclosure, to the chain of title that moved through Vera's network of shells like a whisper becoming a shout. Quinn stayed silent. He had learned silence in a childhood where speaking cost too much, in a young adulthood where his name had been a currency he no longer wanted to spend. He helped his colleagues pack their lockers, his hands steady, his voice low, offering the specific advice that came from knowing how systems failed. Copy your time cards before you sign anything, photograph your badge before they collect it, write down every promise and who made it. They looked at him with gratitude and confusion, wondering why the quiet man who counted boxes knew so much about being discarded. He didn't explain. He couldn't explain without explaining everything, without opening the sealed history that had brought him to this basement, to this moment, to this choice between exposure and complicity. The facilities manager passed by, nervous, sweating, a man who had been offered retention in exchange for cooperation, and Quinn noted the fear in his eyes, the same fear that would soon make him malleable, willing to sign statements that weren't true, to remember events that hadn't happened. This was how the trap closed, not with force, but with the exhaustion of the vulnerable, the calculation that most people would rather survive unjustly than fall righteously. Quinn thought of Leighton upstairs, her warmth, her sharpness, her vulnerability in the glass cage where everyone could see her. He thought of the courier slip she had mentioned in passing, the M. Turner signature, the wrong delivery that was beginning to look like exactly the right delivery for someone's purposes. He should tell her. He should warn her that the debt was designed to spread, to infect, to make everyone in the building either a victim or a collaborator. But telling her would require trusting her with his own exposure, with the identity he had buried so carefully beneath work boots and warehouse dust. The ledger code burned on his palm. The silence burned in his throat. And somewhere above, Vera was smiling, waiting for the next piece to fall into place, unaware that the man she considered disposable had already mapped her entire scheme, had been mapping it for 18 months, waiting for the moment when the debt would open fully and reveal its architects. What would break first, the silence, or the woman he was learning to love without ever saying the word? The boardroom was glass and steel on the 34th floor, a cube of transparency that felt like exposure, like judgment, like the aquarium where the powerful watched the powerless perform their own drowning. Layton was summoned at 2:00 p.m., the email from Vera's assistant polite, final, offering an opportunity to clarify documentation procedures. She knew before she entered what this would be. She had seen the preparation in the morning's whispers, the way her supervisor had stopped meeting her eyes, the way the legal mail had been rerouted around her desk without explanation. Quinn was in the building somewhere, she knew, still processing the fallout of the hourly cuts, still silent in ways that frightened her now more than they intrigued her. She wore her best blazer, the one she saved for court dates and job interviews, the armor of the poor who must always appear more professional than the wealthy to be considered half as competent. The boardroom held 12 people. Vera sat at the head, her cream silk unchanged from the morning, her posture still that of someone who had already won. The managing editor sat to her right, his eyes on his hands. The legal counsel sat to her left, her face arranged in the sympathetic neutrality of someone who would not be paying the consequences. Layton, Vera began, her voice warm, concerned, the tone of a mentor delivering difficult news. We've discovered a serious mishandling of court documents, and the trail seems to lead to your desk. The accusation was not direct. It was performed, offered for the room's consideration, allowing the others to feel they were participating in justice rather than execution. Layton felt her face burn, the heat of public shame that she had feared since childhood, since the free lunch line and the visible poverty that marked you before you spoke. The courier slip for the foreclosure notice, Vera continued, sliding a photocopy across the table, was apparently hidden in your personal files rather than processed according to protocol. This delayed our response, endangered our legal position, and suggests I'm sorry to say a concerning pattern of document mismanagement. The word hidden was the blade, sharper than lost, more deliberate than overlooked. It implied intention, sneakiness, the natural dishonesty of the underpaid. Layton looked at the copy, saw her own handwriting on the margin where she had noted the discrepancy, saw that this evidence of her vigilance was being presented as evidence of her guilt. I was protecting, she began, but Vera raised a gentle hand, the gesture of someone who had already decided that explanations were excuses. We know you've been under stress, supporting your brother, financial pressures that none of us can truly understand. The mention of her brother was a threat wrapped in empathy, a reminder that they knew her vulnerabilities, her dependencies, the levers that could be pulled. But the standards desk requires absolute reliability. I'm afraid we must suspend your access immediately, pending a full review. The word suspend your access meant badge deactivated, email frozen, presence erased. They meant she would leave through the service elevator, past the loading dock where Quinn worked, unable to explain, unable to say goodbye. The managing editor finally looked up, his expression pained but passive, a man who had chosen his own safety over hers. Vera stood, moving around the table to place a hand on Layton's shoulder, the intimacy of dominance, the touch that said I can reach you, I can break you, and everyone here will remember that I was kind while I did it. We do want to help you through this, she murmured, for the room's benefit, for the record that would be written later. But first, we need to understand exactly what happened with those documents, and whether anyone else was involved in their mishandling. The question hung in the glass air, an offer and a trap. They wanted Quinn, Layton realized. They wanted her to name him, to spread the contamination, to prove that she could be useful even in her disgrace. She thought of his silence, his counting, his hands that had never taken more than they needed. She thought of the warmth between them, the service corridor conversations, the almost love that had grown in the spaces between their different worlds. I acted alone, she said, her voice steady despite the burning, the shame that would follow her home, that would sit with her in the studio apartment while her brother asked why she wasn't going to work. There was no one else. Vera's smile tightened, just slightly, the only sign that Layton had refused the expected surrender. Very well, she said, stepping back, resuming her seat, her power. Security will escort you out. Well, be in touch about the review. The glass doors opened. The boardroom watched her leave, 12 witnesses to her humiliation, 12 investments in the story that would be told the receptionist who couldn't handle the responsibility, the poor girl who proved that some people weren't ready for trust. Layton walked through the corridor with her head high, her access badge already dead in her pocket, her future already shrinking. And in the basement, counting boxes he didn't need to count, Quinn felt something shift in the atmosphere, a disturbance in the debt he was tracking, and he knew without knowing how that she had been taken. What would he do now that the woman he loved had been offered as the first sacrifice to the debt's hunger? Vera found her in the parking garage, a space of concrete and shadow where the executive elevators opened onto reserved spots and the service corridors leaked their workers into the dark. Layton was sitting on a concrete barrier, her blazer wrinkled, her badge deactivated but still clutched in her hand, unable to let go of the proof that she had once belonged somewhere. It had been 40 minutes since the boardroom, 40 minutes of security escort and silence, of walking past the loading dock where Quinn's cart had been parked but empty, of searching for his face and finding only the absence that felt like abandonment. "Layton," Vera said, her voice echoing in the concrete canyon, her heels clicking with the certainty of someone who had never waited for a bus, never calculated the cost of a missed shift. She sat beside her, too close, the intimacy of the conqueror with the conquered. "I want you to know that I argued against the severity of the board's decision. I believe in second chances, in understanding the pressures that lead good people to make mistakes." The word mistakes assumed guilt that had never been proven, embedding the narrative deeper with each repetition. Layton said nothing. She had learned silence from Quinn, she realized, learned that sometimes the only power left was the power of not responding, of making them perform their cruelty without your assistance. "The thing is," Vera continued, her tone shifting to confidentiality, to conspiracy, "the situation is more complicated than the board understands. There are other parties involved in the document issues. People in the basement, for instance, who may have influenced your decisions without your full awareness." The mention of the basement was precise, intentional, a map being drawn for Layton to follow. "Quinn Marbury," Vera said, tasting the name, testing it. "He's been quite close to you, hasn't he? Service corridor conversations, shared meals, a certain warmth." The surveillance was admitted casually, the way one might mention weather, establishing that Layton had never had privacy, only the illusion that had served to make her vulnerable. "I can have your job restored," Vera offered, the words like keys jingling just out of reach. "Full access, back pay for the suspension period, even a promotion to legal standards coordinator. All I need is a statement, a simple clarification that Quinn was involved in the document handling, that he encouraged you to deviate from protocol." The bribe was calculated exactly to her needs: the salary that kept her brother in school, the title that meant stability, the return to the world where she had value. Layton felt the temptation like physical weight, the familiar pressure of being poor and being asked to prove your morality through suffering. "He's a warehouse worker," she said, her voice rough. "He doesn't handle documents." "He handles more than you know," Vera replied, her smile sharpening. "He has interests in this building, connections to the debt, a history that doesn't match his uniform. But I need someone credible to say it, someone the board will believe over a man who counts boxes for a living." The description of Quinn was wrong and right at once, Layton felt, the surface accurate but the depths deliberately misunderstood. She thought of his hands, their precision, their restraint. She thought of the way he knew things he shouldn't, the way he never explained himself, the way his silence felt like armor rather than emptiness. "And if I refuse?" she asked, knowing the answer, needing to hear it spoken. "Then the review proceeds," Vera said, standing, brushing invisible dust from her cream silk. "And your brother's financial aid situation complicated, I understand, with the income verification requirements might become difficult to maintain. I'm not threatening you, Layton. I'm offering you a path back to safety. Think about what matters most." The heels clicked away. The concrete absorbed their echo. Layton sat alone with the deactivated badge and the activated choice, understanding that love had become leverage without anyone ever saying the word aloud. What would she sacrifice for her brother's future, and could she live with herself if she sacrificed the only person who had ever seen her clearly? Quinn found the moral test waiting in his locker, a manila envelope with his name written in Vera's hand, the elegance of the script belying the brutality of its contents. Inside were photographs laden in the parking garage, her face in anguish, Vera beside her, the offer being made and a note she has until morning. Your silence protects her. Your truth destroys her. Choose. He stood in the basement corridor, the red exit signs bathing everything in emergency, the vibration of the presses above him now irregular, wounded, like a heartbeat under threat. The test was ancient, biblical, the sacrifice of one innocent for another, the weighing of love against justice in scales that had no fair measure. He could expose the debt trap now, the forged notices, the manipulated filings, the chain of title that led directly to Vera's empire. He had the evidence, had been collecting it for 18 months, waiting for the moment when the scheme would be most vulnerable to exposure. But exposure required witnesses, required credibility, required someone the courts would believe over a woman in cream silk with a boardroom full of allies. Leighton was that credibility. Leighton was also the hostage. If he moved now, Vera would ensure that Leighton's signature appeared on documents she had never seen, that her mishandling became conspiracy, that her love for him became evidence of her corruption. The poor were always framed as sloppy and dishonest. The paperwork would simply formalize what the powerful already believed. Quinn methodically folded the photographs, placed them in his pocket with the morning's debt notice, and began to walk. He walked through the service corridors, past the mail cage where a sealed letter waited that he couldn't yet access, past the legal standards desk where Leighton's empty chair seemed to accuse him, past the executive elevators that had carried her to her humiliation. He walked until he reached the roof access, a door he had discovered months ago, a place where the city spread below like a circuit board, like the debt trail he was tracking, full of connections invisible from the ground. The choice was not binary, he told himself, though it felt like amputation either way. He could find another way, a path that saved Leighton without surrendering to Vera's timeline. But every alternative required time he didn't have, required trust he couldn't yet place, required revealing himself before he was ready. He thought of his true name, the one he had renounced, the fortune he had refused, the family that had taught him how debt could be weaponized because they had weaponized it themselves. He had come to this newsroom to atone, to undo, to find the specific trail of suffering that his own inheritance had helped create. He had not expected to find Leighton, to find love, to find that atonement could feel like betrayal of the living as well as the dead. The city lights flickered below, millions of debts, millions of stories, millions of people counting boxes and hours and praying that the notice wouldn't come for them. Quinn was one of them now, had chosen to be one of them, but he carried the knowledge of the other world, the world where debts were created rather than incurred, where buildings were taken rather than bought, where people like Vera were colleagues rather than enemies. The test was not just about Leighton. It was about whether he could be both poor and knowledgeable, both loving and just, both hidden and present. He pulled out his phone, not his work device, and typed a message to a number he had never used. Confirm chain of title. Lease pendens ready. Stand by. Then he deleted it, unsent, the action itself a rehearsal, a promise to himself that he would not abandon the fight even if he had to fight differently than he had planned. Leighton was suffering because of him, because of his silence, because of the identity he had kept hidden. The debt was opening wider, consuming more, and he was still counting, still waiting, still hoping for the perfect moment that might never come. What would he sacrifice of himself to save her, and would she forgive him if she knew what he had been all along? The forged release appeared on the legal standards desk at 8:00 a.m., delivered by a courier who didn't exist, signed with Leighton's name in a handwriting that was almost but not quite hers. It was a statement, 3 pages of detailed confession that she had mishandled documents at the encouragement of Quinn Marbury, that they had conspired to delay the foreclosure response, that she had hidden evidence in her personal files to protect him and their inappropriate relationship. Quinn saw it from the basement corridor, watching through the glass as the legal counsel read it with theatrical horror, as the managing editor shook his head with practiced disappointment. He didn't rush upstairs. He didn't create a scene. He methodically photographed the delivery through the glass, the couriers retreating back, the timestamp on the filing that showed it had been created last night while Leighton was suspended, her access already revoked, her presence in the building impossible. The forgery was good, he had to admit, professionally executed, the details planted with care, mentions of service corridor meetings that had happened, phrases Leighton had used in private conversations that had been recorded, a timeline that was false in its conclusions but accurate in its observations. This was how the poor were framed, not with lies that could be disproven, but with truths arranged to tell false stories, with vulnerabilities weaponized into evidence of corruption. The legal counsel called a meeting. The boardroom filled again, this time with the energy of scandal, of confirmation, the relief of the powerful when their prejudices are validated. Vera presided, her expression sorrowful, her voice firm. We wanted to believe in Leighton, but the documentation speaks for itself. The dishonesty of the underpaid is always a tragedy, but we cannot let it endanger the institution. The word underpaid was slipped in like a knife, acknowledging the motive while condemning the method, suggesting that poverty itself was the root of moral failure. Quinn watched from the corridor, his hands steady, his mind racing through the chain of evidence he had collected, searching for the specific link that would prove the forgery without requiring him to reveal himself. He needed the original courier slip, the one Leighton had hidden, the one with M. Turner and the wrong delivery. He needed the sealed letter in the mail cage, the one dated before Vera's revitalization began, the one that would establish prior knowledge of the debt trap. He needed time, and time was what he didn't have, because the forged release was already being copied, distributed, becoming the official story faster than truth could catch up. The poor were being taught their lesson that vigilance was paranoia, that copying documents was theft, that love across class lines was conspiracy. The building itself seemed to participate in the lesson, its air conditioning chilling the corridors where hourly workers walked, its security cameras watching the service entrances while the executive floor enjoyed privacy. Quinn thought of Leighton, wherever she was, seeing her name attached to words she had never written, her integrity dissolved in the acid of forged confession. He thought of his own silence, his own complicity in the system that allowed such forgeries to be believed, his own choice to hide rather than fight openly. The debt was spreading like a disease now, badge access failing for workers who had never missed a payment, pay being delayed for administrative review, health coverage threatened for those with chronic conditions that made them expensive. Each failure was documented, each complaint recorded as further evidence of the personnel issues that justified the cuts, the contracts, the eventual sale of the building to Vera's network. The unpaid debt that had opened this story was multiplying, replicating, infecting every transaction, every trust, every relationship in the building. And Quinn stood in the basement, holding the photograph of a forgery in progress, knowing that the next move had to be perfect because there would be no second chance. What evidence could he gather in the hours before Leighton's reputation was permanently destroyed, and could he gather it without becoming the next target of the frame? The unpaid debt spread through the building like a fever, invisible but felt in every transaction, every interaction, every breath of recycled air. Badge access failed first for the facility's staff, the ones who had seen things, who had signed things, who might testify if they could reach their workstations. They gathered at the security desk, holding badges that had worked yesterday, showing time cards that proved their right to be there, being told that system errors were being addressed, that they should wait, that someone would call them. No one called. Pay was delayed next, the direct deposits that had been reliable for years suddenly pending verification, the emails explaining the delay written in the same calm blue as Vera's takeover memo, the same language of streamlining and optimization that meant starvation for those who lived paycheck to paycheck. Quinn watched it happen from his position in the basement, which had somehow become his position, his name removed from the cut list without explanation, a survivor of the plague that was killing his colleagues. He understood the strategy now: keep one witness alive but isolated, make him grateful for his survival, make him complicit in the silence of the others. The health coverage threats came through phone calls, not emails, verbal warnings that pre-existing conditions might require additional documentation, that dependent coverage was being reviewed for compliance, that the brother of a suspended employee might not qualify for the assistance he needed. Each threat was deniable, each call unrecorded, each fear planted to grow in the dark of financial anxiety. Quinn photographed the lines at the security desk, the faces of workers who had given years to the building now being treated as trespassers. He recorded the phone calls when he could, the specific phrases used, the names of the consultants who delivered the news. The debt was not just a financial instrument anymore, it was an atmosphere, a pressure, a weapon that turned workers into paperwork and silence into profit. Leighton existed in this atmosphere somewhere, her phone likely monitored, her movements likely tracked, her brother's school likely receiving routine verification requests that would complicate his enrollment. Quinn had sent her one message, through a channel he hoped was secure: don't sign anything. Don't meet anyone. Trust no call from the building. He didn't know if she received it. He didn't know if she would follow it, if her desperation for her brother's safety would override her trust in his warning. The romance that had grown in service corridors was now a liability for them both, a connection that Veris Network could trace, could document, could present as the motive for every crime they were accused of. Quinn thought of her hands, their warmth, their efficiency, the way they had touched his once in a corridor when they thought no one was watching. That touch was now evidence, the tenderness now conspiracy, the love now leverage. He worked through the day with mechanical precision, loading trucks that shouldn't be loaded, processing invoices that shouldn't be paid, maintaining the appearance of compliance while his mind raced through the escape routes, the evidence caches, the final moves that would be necessary to reverse this infection. The building was sick, the debt was the pathogen, and he was the only one who knew the cure, but the cure required sacrificing the anonymity that had made his investigation possible. What would be left of him if he revealed himself, and would there be anything worth revealing to if Leighton was already lost? They met in the service corridor at 11:47 p.m., a space of pipes and emergency lighting where the building's infrastructure was exposed, where the contrast between the executive suites above and the maintenance world below was made concrete in the condensation on the walls. Quinn had sent the message through the facilities manager, the nervous man who had been offered retention, who had chosen fear over cooperation but still possessed enough guilt to pass a note. Leighton appeared in clothes that weren't hers, borrowed from a friend she hadn't mentioned, her face drawn, her eyes fierce with the particular anger of someone who has been punished for their own innocence. "They forged my name," she said, without greeting, without softness, the words a demand for acknowledgement, for justice, for the truth she knew he possessed. "I know," Quinn replied, his voice low, carrying the weight of his withheld knowledge. "I've documented it. The timeline, the impossibility, the courier who doesn't exist." He didn't touch her. He wanted to, with an intensity that frightened him, but the corridor had cameras, had listeners, had the infrastructure of surveillance that made every intimacy a potential weapon. "You knew," she said, not accusing, stating, reading him with the sharpness that had always seen through his silence to something beneath. "You knew this would happen. You've been waiting for it." The observation was dangerous, accurate, the first crack in the wall he had built between his present and his past. "I knew the pattern," he admitted, choosing his words like steps on a narrow bridge. "I didn't know you would be the one caught in it. I would have." He stopped, the confession too large for the corridor, for the moment, for the identity he still protected. "Would have what?" she asked, stepping closer, crossing the line that had kept them in separate worlds, service worker and receptionist, basement and glass cage, poor and poorer. "Warned me sooner. Protected me. Who are you that you could have protected anyone?" The questions were the trap he had feared, the demand for revelation that he couldn't yet satisfy. He reached into his pocket, withdrew the key fob he always carried, old metal, worn leather, a family crest that he had never explained, that she had never asked about. He held it out, not explaining, only offering it as proof of something larger than his uniform, his counting, his silence. She took it, her fingers brushing his, the contact electric in the damp air, the first touch that acknowledged what was between them without the protection of pretense. "I can't tell you everything," he said, the words painful, the withholding a kind of violence against the intimacy they were building. "Not yet. Not until I can ensure your safety, your brother's safety, the end of this debt trap." "And if I can't wait?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. "If I need to sign their papers to keep my brother in school, to keep us housed, to survive?" The moral pressure was explicit now, the test Vera had designed playing out in the corridor's shadows. Quinn felt the weight of his hidden identity, the power he had renounced that could solve her immediate problems, the principles that prevented him from using it. If you sign, he said carefully, you become part of the frame. You validate their story. You make everything I've done, everything I'm trying to do, harder. And if I don't sign, she replied, I lose everything I have, everything I've worked for, while you stand there with your secrets and your key fob and you're not yet. The line between them was drawn, not of anger but of incompatible urgencies, her poverty immediate and crushing, his mission delayed and uncertain. They stood in the corridor's red light, the building's heartbeat irregular above them, the debt spreading through the walls like a living thing, and they crossed a line without speaking it aloud. She kept the key fob. He kept her hand for one moment longer than necessary. And they separated without plan, without promise, only with the understanding that love had become leverage and their survival now depended on what they would sacrifice for each other, and what they would refuse to sacrifice. What would she choose when morning came, and could he protect her if she chose him? The sealed letter surfaced in the mail cage at 6:00 a.m., caught in the sorting mechanism that had been malfunctioning for weeks, a delay that had prevented proper distribution of legal documents while the debt trap closed. Quinn found it while searching for the original courier slip, his access somehow still functional, his presence in the building still tolerated, a mystery he didn't question because it served his needs. The envelope was heavy linen paper, the kind used for formal communications between entities that considered themselves permanent, addressed to the trustees, newsroom employee ownership plan, with a return address that made Quinn's hands still, his breath catch, his methodical counting falter for the first time in 18 months. The date was 6 weeks ago, before Vera's revitalization announcement, before the unpaid debt notice, before the public humiliation of Leighton in the glass boardroom. The letter was from his family's legal counsel, the same firm that had managed his renunciation, his disappearance, his rebirth as Quinn Marbury, poor warehouse worker. It informed the trustees of a pending claim against the building's title, a claim that originated from a debt instrument created by Quinn's own father, decades ago, part of the empire of obligation that Quinn had spent his adult life trying to dismantle. The letter had been suppressed, deliberately held in the mail cage, prevented from reaching the trustees who might have acted on it, might have prepared defenses, might have prevented the current crisis. Quinn held it with the same hands that had once signed documents worth millions, that had renounced those millions in a ceremony that had erased his name but not his knowledge. The letter proved prior knowledge. It proved that Vera's network had been aware of the title defect before launching the revitalization, that the entire scheme was not opportunistic but premeditated, designed to exploit a weakness that had been manufactured and then hidden. It also proved something about Quinn that he had hoped to reveal on his own terms, that his presence in the building was not coincidence, that his investigation was not disinterested, that his identity was connected to the debt in ways that would make him complicit in the eyes of those who didn't understand renunciation, atonement, the choice to undo rather than inherit. He photographed the letter, sealed it again with care, and placed it in the deepest pocket of his work coat. The sealed letter was the key to everything, to proving the debt trap's design, to exposing Vera's prior knowledge, to validating Leighton's innocence by showing the frame had been built before she ever touched a document. But it was also the key to his own exposure, the document that would connect Quinn Marbury to the name he had buried, the fortune he had refused, the family that had created the very system he was fighting. He thought of Leighton, of the key fob she still carried, of the questions she hadn't yet asked but would ask soon, when the letter's contents became part of the public record. He thought of the facility's manager, the nervous witness who had passed her message, who might pass more if the price was right, if the fear was managed, if the guilt was activated. The letter was power, but power that burned the hand that wielded it. Quinn walked through the basement, past the loading dock where the first trucks were arriving, past the workers whose badges still failed, whose pay was still delayed, whose health coverage was still threatened. He was one of them in appearance, in labor, in the daily struggle to make wages match needs. But the letter in his pocket made him something else, something he had tried to stop being, and he had to decide whether to burn with that knowledge or to use it to light the way out for everyone else. What would happen when the letter was opened, and who would be destroyed by its contents besides Vera? The witness in facilities panicked at 10:00 a.m., a man named Harold who had signed retention papers he didn't understand, who had installed cameras he wasn't supposed to mention, who had seen the forged documents being placed in Leighton's drawer by hands wearing executive suite watches. Quinn found him in the mechanical room, surrounded by the building's lungs and heart, the HVAC systems that kept the rich comfortable and the poor chilled, a space of noise that prevented recording, of heat that prevented lingering. "I can't do this," Harold said, his hands shaking, his face slick with the sweat of fear and the humidity of the machinery. "They want me to testify that I saw Leighton with the documents, that she was copying them, that she was acting suspicious. But I saw who really put them there. I saw the watch. I know who it was." Quinn listened with the patience of someone who had heard such confessions before, who knew their value and their fragility. Harold had information that could break the frame, could prove Leighton's innocence, could expose the specific mechanism of the forgery. But Harold also had a mortgage, a sick wife, a job that was his only insurance against medical debt, a life that could be destroyed by the retaliation that would follow his testimony. "I'll protect you," Quinn said, the promise heavy, knowing the cost, knowing that protection required resources he had renounced, connections he had buried, a name he had sworn not to use. "Write down what you saw. Date it. Sign it. I'll keep it safe, and I'll use it only when it can do the most good, when you're protected by the exposure itself." Harold wrote, his hand unsteady. The account detailed the time, the watch, the specific documents, the instruction he had received afterward to forget what he had seen. He offered it to Quinn like a child offering a broken toy, wanting absolution, wanting safety, wanting the impossible guarantee that truth would be rewarded rather than punished. Quinn took it, placed it with the sealed letter in his pocket, and gave Harold the only thing he could: a phone number, not his own, a contact in legal aid who owed him favors from a previous life, a resource that might provide representation if the retaliation came fast. But Harold's fear was stronger than his courage, or perhaps his wife's medical bills were stronger than both. By 2:00 p.m., he had recanted, sent a message to Vera's counsel claiming that Quinn had coerced him, that his earlier statement was confused, that he wished to correct the record with a new statement that matched the official narrative. The truth, offered for a price, was withdrawn when the price of telling it became clear. Quinn received the message through the facility's rumor network, the same channels that had carried his own communications, now turned against him. Harold's recantation made Quinn look like the conspirator, the manipulator, the warehouse worker who had tried to suborn perjury to protect his lover and his own hidden interests. The planted details were working Quinn's knowledge of legal procedures, his precise understanding of documentation, his unusual composure around money talk, all were being assembled into a picture of him as the true architect of the conspiracy, using Leighton as his tool, using Harold as his witness. The poor were being taught another lesson: that solidarity was dangerous, that witnesses were unreliable, that the only safe choice was individual survival at the expense of collective truth. Quinn stood in the mechanical room, the noise of the machinery drowning out his thoughts, the heat pressing against his skin like the pressure of the identity he was trying to keep buried. He had the sealed letter, he had Harold's original statement, he had the chain of title that connected everything to Vera. But he was losing the credibility to use them, the witnesses to validate them, the time to deploy them before the narrative hardened into legal fact. Leighton was out there, making her choice, perhaps signing her name to lies to save her brother, perhaps waiting for him to become the person he had promised to be. And he was here, in the basement, surrounded by the building's machinery, holding truth that no one would believe because of who he appeared to be. What could one man do against a system designed to make truth sound like conspiracy, and how much longer could he wait before that system consumed everyone he was trying to save? Leighton discovered the chain-off title map in the dead hours of the night, in the studio apartment she shared with her brother, using a laptop borrowed from a friend who worked in title insurance, a connection she had cultivated carefully, knowing that information was the only currency the poor could accumulate. The map was not a single document but a constellation of them: deeds, mortgages, assignments, foreclosure notices, all public record, all available to anyone with the patience to search, the knowledge to connect, the desperation to see patterns that others ignored. She had started with the notice taped to the staff entrance, the one Quinn had mentioned in passing, the docket number that had seemed random until she searched it. From there, she followed the trail: the original mortgage, paid off in 1987, somehow reactivated in 2019 the assignment to a shell company with a P.O. box in Delaware, the transfer to a trust with a name similar to but not identical to the employee ownership plan, the default notice that cited payments never missed, the foreclosure proceeding that moved at impossible speed. Every error pointed to the same design. The wrong tenant on the courier slip. M. Turner was an anagram, she realized, or near enough, for trust. No, a message hidden in the mistake, a signature of the scheme's architect. The date discrepancies, the signature mismatches, the notary stamps from agents who didn't exist, all were features, not bugs, designed to create confusion, to delay response, to make the victims appear sloppy while the predators appeared precise. She mapped it on her kitchen table, her brother asleep in the corner, his textbook spread across his pillow, his future depending on her ability to prove that their instability was manufactured, not earned. The map showed Vera's network like a nervous system, feeding on the building, on the workers, on the very concept of ownership that the newsroom had believed it possessed. And at the center of the map, at the origin point of the debt that had infected everything, was a name Layton recognized from Quinn's key fob, from his silence, from the way he held himself when money was discussed. Ashford Marbury Holdings, the family empire that had created the instruments Vera was now using. She sat back from the table, the laptop's glow illuminating her face, the realization spreading through her like cold water. Quinn was connected to the debt not as victim but as origin. He had known the pattern because he had seen it from the inside, had perhaps designed it, had certainly benefited from it before he appeared in the basement with his counting and his cart. The romance that had felt like rescue now felt like potential manipulation, the silence like possible guilt, the key fob like evidence of a deeper game she hadn't understood she was playing. But the map also showed something else, the renunciation. A filing, 3 years ago, in a court she had never heard of, where Quinn Ashford had legally severed himself from his family's holdings, had rejected his inheritance, had disappeared into the name Marbury and the warehouse basement and the methodical counting of boxes. He had not been hiding his guilt, he had been hiding his atonement, his choice to undo rather than inherit, his investigation that required him to be invisible. The map was proof of the debt trap's design, but it was also proof of Quinn's transformation, the earned identity that he had been building through 18 months of labor, of silence, of careful observation. She had what she needed to expose Vera, to clear her own name, to save her brother's future. But she also had what she needed to destroy Quinn, to reveal him as the heir who had created the very system he claimed to be fighting, to make his current poverty appear as performance rather than principle. The choice was the same one he had faced: truth versus convenience, justice versus survival, love versus the protection of the vulnerable. She held the map in her hands, the paper warm from the printer, the connections clear, the power of knowledge finally in her possession. What would she do with the power to save them both or destroy them both? And could she trust that the man she loved was the man he had become rather than the man he had been born? Quinn's coincidences stopped adding up for Vera at the board meeting, a casual question planted like a trap, a test of what he knew and how he knew it. She had invited him, unprecedented, a warehouse worker in the executive conference room, a demonstration of her power to summon and to judge. "Mr. Marbury," she said, her voice honey over steel, "you've shown such interest in our legal proceedings. Such precise knowledge of filing deadlines, of title requirements, of foreclosure timelines. Almost as if you'd studied them before." The room was small, selected for intimacy, for pressure, for the sense that this was a conversation rather than an interrogation. The managing editor was there, the legal counsel, a representative from the creditor company that existed only on paper. Quinn sat with the posture of someone who had been trained for such rooms, not the posture of someone who had learned survival in basements, and he felt the trap close around the gap between his performance and his history. "I count things," he said, his voice steady, the answer he had prepared for such questions. "Boxes, hours, debts. When you count long enough, you see patterns." "Patterns," Vera repeated, tasting the word. "Like the pattern of a family crest on an old key fob. Like the pattern of a signature on legacy property documents that match your unusual composure." The specifics were precise, planted, evidence of surveillance that had been ongoing, of details that had been collected while he thought himself invisible. She knew about the key fob, perhaps had known since Leighton carried it, perhaps had always known. She knew about his signature, the distinctive formation of letters that had appeared on documents in his previous life, that he had tried to change but could not fully erase. The trap was designed to make him reveal himself, to panic, to confess or to lie in ways that would be documented, that would be used to discredit everything he had gathered, everything Leighton had mapped, the sealed letter and the witness statements and the chain of title that led to her door. "I'm a warehouse worker," Quinn said, not denying, not confirming, maintaining the ambiguity that had protected him, that was now cracking under the weight of direct attention. "I don't know what documents you're referring to." "Don't you?" Vera asked, sliding a photocopy across the table, the signature comparison, the family crest enlarged, the timeline that showed his presence in the building beginning exactly when the debt instruments were being prepared for deployment. "Because I think you know a great deal. I think you've been playing a long game, Mr. Ashford, or Marbury, or whoever you've decided to be this year. And I think your girlfriend is going to suffer for your performance unless you decide to be cooperative." The threat was explicit, the leverage named Leighton's safety for his silence, his exposure for her protection, the ancient exchange of love for survival. Quinn felt the anger he had controlled for so long, the rage of the heir who had seen what wealth did, who had chosen poverty to escape it, only to find the same corruption waiting in different clothes. He wanted to reveal himself, to use the name he had renounced as weapon rather than burden, to summon the resources that could crush Vera's network in hours rather than months. But the sealed letter in his pocket reminded him that such revelation would also confirm every accusation, would make him appear as the hidden architect rather than the exposed investigator, would validate the forgery that framed Leighton by proving that he had indeed been concealing his true identity and interests. "I have nothing to offer you," he said, the words true in ways she couldn't understand, true because what he had was not for sale, not for trade, not for the protection of one person at the expense of the truth that could protect many. Vera smiled, the smile of someone who had expected this answer, who had prepared for it, who had already moved the next pieces into place. "Then I suppose we'll see what Miss Fairchild offers us instead," she said, dismissing him with a gesture. The meeting ended, the trap sprung. Quinn walked out through the executive corridor, past the glass boardroom where Leighton had been humiliated, past the reception desk where she had worked, past the service elevator that would take him back to the basement where he belonged. His coincidences, his knowledge, his composure, his precision were now evidence against him, the planted details that had been intended to expose Vera turned into weapons that exposed him. The identity he had hidden to fight the system was becoming the reason the system would win. How could he prove that he was the heir who had renounced the name, not the heir who was using a false name to steal the building, when every piece of evidence that proved his innocence also proved his disguise? The shock identity reveal came not with Quinn's confession but with the sealed letters opening, in a courtroom that had been arranged in hours through channels Quinn had sworn not to use, a legal aid attorney who had once been his family's opponent and was now, reluctantly, his instrument. The letter was authenticated first, its date verified, its contents read aloud, the notification to the trustees of the title defect, the prior knowledge of the debt trap, the connection to Ashford Marbury Holdings that predated Vera's revitalization by 6 weeks. Then came the proof of Quinn's renunciation, the court filing from 3 years ago, the legal severance from his family's interests, the documented choice to reject inheritance and identity alike. The signature match was presented, not as evidence of guilt but as evidence of transformation. The same hand that had signed corporate directives now signed time cards, the same name that had created debt instruments now appeared on witness statements against them. The timeline was established. Quinn had been investigating the debt trail for 18 months, before Vera's scheme began, before Leighton was framed, before the unpaid notice was taped to the staff entrance. He had not come to the newsroom to exploit it but to protect it, his poverty earned through rejection rather than misfortune, his silence the discipline of atonement rather than the calculation of conspiracy. The courtroom watched as Quinn Ashford Marbury, heir to one of the largest real estate empires in the country, stood in the clothes he had worn in the basement, the boots that had carried pallets of newsprint, the hands that had counted boxes while accumulating the evidence that would now freeze Vera's transfers, collapse her scheme publicly, validate every accusation that had been made against him as proof of his integrity. Leighton was there, in the gallery, the key fob returned to his possession, her map of the chain of title entered as evidence, her name cleared by the same documents that had framed her. She saw him clearly for the first time, not the warehouse worker she had loved in service corridors, not the mystery she had resented in his silence, but the man who had chosen to be powerless in order to understand power, who had chosen to be poor in order to fight poverty, who had carried his true identity like a sealed letter, to be opened only when it could do the most good. The justice payoff was immediate: the injunction freezing the building's transfer, the lease pendens notice filed against Veris Network, the regulator referral for fraud, the court-ordered audit of the debt chain that would take years but would ensure no future victim would face what Leighton had faced. Vera sat in the defendant's chair, her cream silk finally wrinkled, her smile finally gone, the power reversal complete, the public exposure absolute. But the emotional scar was also immediate, visible in the space between Quinn and Leighton as they left the courtroom, the love that had survived but been transformed by the revelation. She had loved a man who didn't exist, a construction of silence and mystery that had hidden both his nobility and his origin. He had loved her from a position he had concealed, his tenderness always shadowed by the knowledge he couldn't share. The identity reveal had earned him justice but cost him the simplicity of their connection, the equality of their poverty, the romance that had grown in the assumption of shared vulnerability. They walked out into the light, the building behind them finally safe, the debt trap finally exposed, the future finally possible. But the walk was separate, the touch hesitant, the question of what they were to each other now that what he had been was known, now that her love had been proven real despite his disguise. The shock of his identity was also the shock of his choice, the demonstration that people could become what they were not born to be, that atonement was possible, that the systems they had fought could be dismantled by those who understood them from the inside. What would they become to each other, now that the secrets were opened and the only thing left to build was a love without disguise, without leverage, without the pressure of debts unpaid? The public and legal power reversal unfolded over weeks rather than hours, the mechanism of justice grinding slow but grinding fine, the filings that froze the transfers becoming the foundation for sanctions, for criminal referral, for the audit that traced every error to its designed origin. Vera's scheme collapsed publicly, not with a single dramatic moment but with the accumulation of proof, the sealed letter and the renunciation documents and the chain-off title map forming a narrative that the courts and the press could not ignore, that the regulators could not dismiss as conspiracy theory. The newsroom that had been the victim became the reporter, its own story told with the thoroughness that had been its mission, the unpaid debt that had opened everything, now the headline that would define the year. Quinn testified, his name finally fully his history finally fully known, his voice steady as he explained the architecture of the debt trap, the way forged notices became eviction orders, the way silence became profit, the way buildings were taken from those who believed they owned them. He did not hide his origin, his complicity in the system's creation, his choice to undo rather than inherit. He spoke as both perpetrator and victim, expert and penitent, the heir who had learned that wealth was not protection but responsibility, that the only true inheritance was the obligation to dismantle what had been built unjustly. Leighton testified too, her humiliation in the boardroom now evidence of the intimidation, her forged signature now proof of the frame, her love for Quinn validated not as conspiracy but as connection across the lines that power had tried to draw between them. She spoke of the service corridors, the counting, the warmth that had grown in the spaces between their different worlds, the romance that had become leverage and had survived to become something else, scarred but honest, changed but enduring. The justice payoff extended beyond the courtroom, the building returned to the employee trust, the hourly workers reinstated with back pay, the health coverage restored, the brothers' financial aid secured through a fund that Quinn established quietly, without his name attached, a continuation of his earned identity rather than his renounced one. But the emotional scar remained, for both of them, the knowledge that love had been tested by the worst pressures, that trust had been built in silence and revealed in crisis, that their connection would always carry the memory of what had been hidden and what had been risked. They met again in the service corridor, the space where their romance had grown, now lit by the regular heartbeat of a healthy building, the pipes dry, the air conditioning balanced, the debt that had infected the walls finally purged. Quinn wore clothes that were neither warehouse uniform nor executive suit, a new identity being built from the remnants of both, the key fob in his pocket no longer secret but still personal, a reminder of where he had been rather than who he had been born. Leighton wore her blazer, the armor of the poor, but with a confidence that came from having survived the worst that power could do, from having chosen truth over convenience even when it cost her everything, from having earned the right to stand beside him not as rescued but as equal. They did not touch immediately. They spoke, finally, without the pressure of secrets, without the leverage of unspoken truths, without the fear that every word would be used against them. They spoke of the future, of the work still to be done, of the other buildings and other debts and other Leydens and other Quinns who were still trapped in schemes that had not yet been exposed. They spoke of love, not as it had been in the emergency of crisis, but as it might be in the ordinary of survival, scarred, honest, and changed. The power reversal was complete. The rich had been held accountable, the poor had been vindicated, the system that had turned workers into paperwork had been turned back into justice. But the victory was not neat, not healing, not a return to innocence. It was earned, like Quinn's identity, like Leyden's courage, like the love that had survived the opening of the unpaid debt and the collapse of everything that had hidden it. They reached for each other in the corridor's light, their hands meeting with the hesitation of people who had learned that touch could be weaponized, who were learning again that it could also be sanctuary. The building breathed around them, safe for now, its future uncertain but its present honest, its debts finally paid not with money but with truth. What would they build together, now that the collapse was over and the only thing left to construct was a life without disguise, a love without leverage, a justice that required constant vigilance to maintain? The unpaid debt that opened this story closed with something rarer than repayment. It closed with transformation. Quinn Marbury, who had been Quinn Ashford, who had been the heir who renounced the name, stood finally in the light of earned identity, his poverty no longer disguise but discipline, his wealth no longer inheritance but instrument for dismantling the systems he had once helped create. Leyden Fairchild, who had been humiliated in glass boardrooms and framed by forged documents, stood beside him not as rescued but as vindicated, her vigilance rewarded, her love proven real despite every pressure to make it leverage for betrayal. The newsroom that had been a victim became a witness, its survival a testament to the possibility that buildings could be held, truth could be defended, and the poor could prevail against the real estate empires that treated their lives as paperwork. The romance that grew in service corridors survived its own exposure, scarred by the secrets that had been necessary, honest in the aftermath of their revelation, changed into something that could endure the ordinary challenges of lives no longer defined by emergency. The justice was not neat, not healing, not a return to innocence before the debt notice was taped to the door. It was earned, like every twist in this story, through planted details that paid off, through moral tests that were failed and passed, through the choice to value truth over convenience even when the cost was everything. The emotional scar remained, for Quinn the memory of silence that had hurt as much as protected, for Leyden the memory of humiliation that could not be undone, for both the knowledge that love had been tested by the worst that power could do and had survived to become stronger but different. This is the story of what we owe to each other when the systems we inhabit are designed to turn us against each other, of what we can become when we refuse those designs, of the identity we earn through the choices we make rather than the names we are given. If this story moved you, if the reveal changed how you saw the early moments, if the romance tested under threat resonated with your own experience of love in difficult times, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to remember that the unpaid debts of the powerful can be challenged, that the silence of the vulnerable can be strategic, that transformation is possible even for those born into systems they later choose to dismantle. Like this video to signal to the algorithm that stories of earned justice deserve reach, and subscribe with notifications on because the next story begins with a forged diploma and a hospital billing department that doesn't know who it's threatening. The collapse is over. The building stands. The love survives, scarred, honest, and changed. See you in the next one.